30 years I poured into that company, my heart and soul etched into the successful execution of every demanding project. Indeed, no one within the department had shouldered a heavier portfolio than I. Yet, when the promotion lists were circulated, my name was consistently, glaringly, absent. Blame, however, that relentless bloodhound, always found my scent with unerring accuracy whenever the slightest thing went awry. Every key position, every avenue for advancement within our department was barricaded, locked down by the boss's ubiquitous relatives who treated the professional workspace like their personal family playground, a fiefdom for their amusement and enrichment. If you so much as inadvertently stood in the path of their gilded gravy train, they would marshal their forces, a familial phalanx, and unceremoniously shut you down. It was, therefore, entirely predictable that I became the first casualty they unceremoniously pushed out when their machinations required a scapegoat. I marched directly into Steve's office, the plush-carpeted hallway that once felt familiar, now seeming like an impossibly long corridor leading to a foregone conclusion, my resolve a tight, bitter knot in my stomach. I demanded an explanation. He had the unmitigated nerve to meet my gaze, his own unwavering, a chilling display of manufactured indifference as he delivered the well-rehearsed company line. "Sarah," he began, his tone oily with false concern. Then, with breathtaking audacity, he had the gall to suggest I retire early, phrasing it as if it were my own brilliant, timely idea, a graceful exit I should embrace. When my son, Jordan, heard the news later that evening, his indignation was a live wire, nearly catapulting him from his chair. "Mom, come work with me," he exclaimed, his face lighting up with an enthusiasm that was both heartwarming and fiercely protective, grinning as if he'd just single-handedly won the lottery. And so I did. I left that toxic edifice of ingratitude behind and joined Jordan's fledgling team. It was only then, after my departure, that Steve, my previous employer, belatedly, and to his profound detriment, realized that the individual he had so casually kicked to the curb was, in fact, the linchpin, the silent engine that had kept his entire department humming, the very backbone holding the precarious structure together. Leveraging the extensive network of contacts I'd meticulously cultivated over 3 decades, I swiftly landed Jordan's company a sizable, high-profile project. We were immediately plunged into the thick of it, pushing relentlessly forward, operating at full speed. Steve, predictably, caught wind of our early success and couldn't resist attempting to smear my contribution. In his jaundiced eyes, I was merely a washed-up freeloader, a relic coasting on the evaporating fumes of past glories. He publicly attributed our significant contract win to pure luck and nothing more substantive. Meanwhile, his entire gaggle of incompetent relatives still festering within his company continued their relentless campaign of petty sabotage, throwing procedural wrenches into my every attempt to coordinate with my former department, nitpicking every document, delaying every approval. Jordan, fiercely loyal and possessing a keen sense of justice, couldn't stand to witness it. More than once, his frustration boiled over, and he tried to persuade me to quit entirely. "Mom, that place, those people, they don't deserve an ounce more of your energy. You've given them more than enough." But I had meticulously done the math between the accrued pension, the rightfully owed severance package, and the extended health care coverage. I was looking at a sum well into the tens of thousands of dollars. I swallowed the bitter pill of daily injustice, a metallic taste of resentment always on my tongue, and told myself, with gritted teeth, that I would hang on, endure their machinations for just 6 more months. As it transpired, I didn't even get that long. Steve's secretary, Vanessa, who was, let's be brutally honest, far more accurately described as his much younger mistress, was, in a delicious twist of nepotistic irony, actually the daughter of one of Steve's distant cousins. She was perhaps 27, 28 at most, ambitious and utterly devoid of scruples. To secure my increasingly precarious position for herself, she took it upon her impeccably manicured self to comb meticulously through my entire compensation package. Then, All saccharine smiles and feigned concern, she gently suggested to Steve that keeping me on the payroll was, from a purely financial perspective, a significant and unjustifiable mistake. From that moment onward, Steve turned utterly ruthless. Overtime became my new, unwelcome normal, often uncompensated. Weekends vanished into a blur of unacknowledged labor. My paycheck, once reliably prompt, suddenly began experiencing inexplicable processing delays. I knew exactly what insidious game he was playing, attempting to push me out, to force my resignation without actually having to fire me and incur the associated costs. But my sights were locked on the prize, the compensation that was rightfully, legally mine. If there was anything I was owed, any benefit accrued, I was damn well going to get it. So, I kept my head down, endured the escalating pressure, and persevered. This man, Steve, who had worked beside me for 30 long years, a man I had once, however misguidedly, called a friend, was now a complete stranger, as if an alien intelligence had usurped a colleague I once knew and respected. Ever since he had become entangled with that calculating secretary, it was as if he'd been entirely replaced. She whispered her poison into his ear every other day, and Steve, utterly besotted, actually started publicly calling me out during team meetings, blowing minor, insignificant errors wildly out of proportion, attempting to humiliate me in front of my peers. His relatives, those parasitic sycophants who had always deeply resented the salary I earned through sheer hard work and competence, quickly sensed the shift in the power dynamic, like jackals scenting weakness, and pounced. They banded together, a united front of malice, to make my professional life a daily gauntlet of obstruction and insinuation, engineer delays, deliberately misplaced blame, outright sabotage of my ongoing work. A relatively straightforward project, one I could have managed blindfolded in my sleep, became completely, hopelessly derailed under their combined ineptitude and interference. In the end, inevitably, it failed. The company absorbed a loss of nearly $40,000 due to their bungling. Steve exploded. He dragged me into his office, his face a mask of thunderous rage, and unleashed a torrent of invective, his voice cracking with uncontrolled fury. "Sarah, what the hell is going on with you?" he shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "Are you so damn old now, so senile, that you can't even manage a basic, straightforward project anymore?" I kept my voice steady, my composure, a thin veneer over the cauldron of anger simmering within me, and attempted to explain. "Steve, this failure isn't on my shoulders. The team you assigned, your relatives, they seem to be actively refusing to follow established protocols to tow." I didn't even manage to finish the sentence. With a sudden violent movement, he grabbed a heavy file folder from his desk and hurled it directly at my face. I wasn't expecting him to actually lash out physically, to cross that inviolable line, so I didn't move, didn't flinch. The sharp, reinforced corner of the folder caught me squarely on the forehead, tearing the skin. A hot, searing sting shot through me as blood, warm and sticky, started to run down my face, obscuring my vision. I reached up a trembling hand and touched the wound. My fingers came away soaked in crimson. But it wasn't the throbbing physical pain that stunned me into momentary paralysis. It was the profound, disbelieving shock. Steve had laid hands on me. 30 years. 30 years of working side by side, of shared successes and weathered crises, and this is how he chose to end it. His expression shifted then, just for a fleeting, almost imperceptible second. Maybe it was a flicker of guilt, a momentary horrified recognition of his own actions. Maybe not. Whatever transient emotion crossed his face, it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He looked at me, his eyes now cold, devoid of any discernible feeling. "Go get that taken care of at the clinic," he ordered, his voice flat. "And by 8:00 a.m. tomorrow, I want a full recovery plan for this mess on my desk. If not, well, you know what that means." So, that was it. That was how he intended to cut me loose, with a physical assault and a veiled threat. A wave of vertigo threatened to buckle my knees, but I locked them, focusing on the swirling pattern of the cheap office carpet, until the world momentarily stopped spinning. I fought off the dizziness, turned without a word, and walked to the nearest urgent care facility. I had the gash cleaned, stitched, and bandaged, then made my way home, unsteady on my feet, but defiantly upright. I am 59 years old this year, just a mere 7 years shy of official retirement. From the day I joined Steve's fledgling company at the age of 29, full of ambition and youthful energy, all the way to this present, bitter day, it has been 30 long, arduous years. That company was more than just my job. It was the bulk of my adult life, the repository of my professional aspirations. Back then, in the early days, Steve handled the business development, the external schmoozing, and I managed the internal operations, the nuts and bolts that kept the enterprise alive. We started in a cramped, dingy little office, barely larger than a closet, and together, line by painstaking line, side by side, we built an entire thriving department. But everything changed, irrevocably, 2 years ago, right after he became entangled with her, with Vanessa. I remember her vividly, the purported niece of one of Steve's distant cousins, always impeccably, ostentatiously dressed, as if she were perpetually hosting an awards show, her eyes constantly scanning you up and down, appraisingly, like you were a piece of livestock on display. There was a 36-year age gap between her and Steve, a chasm that, instead of making him maintain a professional distance, seemed to make him completely surrender his professional judgment at the altar of infatuation. That girl wasn't just a pretty face. She possessed a cunning, manipulative strategy. She played him like a master puppeteer, his strings dancing to her every tune, and before long, she had systematically stuffed the company's payroll with her entire extended, and largely unqualified, family. The inevitable result was pure, unadulterated chaos. The place became a disorganized mess. Leadership, once clear and decisive, fell apart completely. Efficiency plummeted, deadlines were missed, and morale tanked. The old team, the dedicated, hard-working individuals who had built this place alongside me, started quitting, one by one, unable to tolerate the pervasive dysfunction, the blatant cronyism. But it's brutal out there in the job market right now, especially if you're over a certain age. Quitting, for many, basically means you're consigning yourself to long-term unemployment. Watching those old, valued teammates walk away, their faces etched with disillusionment, was a profound sense of loss, as if parts of my own professional history were being systematically amputated. I wanted to stop them, to offer them some hope, but there was nothing I could tangibly do. Thankfully, my son, Jordan, a testament to sheer grit and intelligence, had successfully built up his own engineering firm over these past few years, not through connections or nepotism, but through hard work and unwavering dedication. I discreetly sent my old, displaced crew his way, helping them get back on their feet, find new professional homes where their skills would be valued. And now, with almost everyone else gone, I was the last one left, holding the bag in this rapidly sinking, mismanaged ship. I started to wonder, with a growing sense of weary resignation, maybe it was finally time for me to go too. That night, after the incident in Steve's office, I stood on my porch, the cool night air a balm on my throbbing forehead, my hand resting on the familiar brass doorknob. But I couldn't bring myself to open the door, to carry the ugliness of the day into the sanctuary of my home. Instead, with a sudden decisive impulse, I called Steve. He picked up quickly, the pounding, visceral thump of electronic dance music and a cacophony of male shouting and high-pitched female laughter flooding through the line. There was no question. He was in some loud, disreputable nightclub or crowded bar. I tried to keep my voice steady, to project a calm I didn't feel. "Steve, can you please step somewhere quieter? We need to talk." There was a brief, crackling pause on the line. Then he dropped his voice, though the background noise was still intrusive. "I'm in the restroom. What is it you want now? Money for your medical bill? Fine. I'll deduct it from your final salary." I let out a bitter, humorless laugh and took a long, deep, steadying breath. "Steve, we've worked together, side by side, for 3 decades. Don't try to tell me that none of that history, none of that shared effort, meant absolutely anything to you. Did you conveniently forget who mortgaged their own house, risked their family's financial security, when the company hit that devastating funding crisis years ago? Who stood steadfastly by you when even your own family advised you to let it all collapse, to declare bankruptcy? His voice, when he finally responded, turned ice cold, devoid of any warmth, any recognition of our shared past. Sarah, I remember. And I paid you back every single cent of that loan, didn't I? With interest. I didn't short you a dime. If you're attempting to guilt-trip me with ancient history, forget it. This is a business, Sarah. We don't operate on emotions. We operate on performance, on results. You blew a basic, straightforward project. Frankly, you should have been gone a long time ago. My chest tightened, a painful constriction, as if an invisible band were squeezing the air from my lungs. I fought to hold my voice together, to keep the tremor of outrage from betraying my composure. You really feel no shame at all, do you, Steve? Your precious secretary's relatives, they barely lift a finger, yet they collect hefty paychecks. I have single-handedly carried almost every significant project in this department for the past 2 years. I worked through Thanksgiving last year, through Christmas, while you were otherwise occupied. You didn't even flinch, didn't offer a word of thanks. His voice got even colder, if that were possible. It doesn't matter. That failed project, the one you mismanaged, lost us over $40,000. That amount comes directly out of your final paycheck. And if that's not sufficient to cover the full loss, then you'll be personally responsible for the rest. That's your problem, Sarah, not mine. Then I heard it, a syrupy, flirtatious female voice in the background, Vanessa's unmistakable tones. Babe, why are you still on the phone with that old lady? Come back to me. I'm waiting for you. The line went dead. The click of the disconnected call was as final, as brutal as a slammed door in my face. I stood there on the porch for a long time, staring blankly into the oppressive darkness, the cold seeping into my bones. I truly hadn't expected Steve to be this utterly, irredeemably heartless. When I finally walked through my front door, Jordan took one look at the fresh, stark white bandage adorning my forehead, and a thundercloud passed over his features, his eyes, moments before alight with a welcoming smile, now flashing with a protective, incandescent fury. Mom, what the hell happened to you? I let out a weary sigh and gave him a brief, unvarnished rundown of what had transpired at the office, culminating in the assault. The second I finished speaking, he rolled up his sleeves, his jaw set in a hard, determined line, and stormed towards the door. I rushed to block his path, my heart pounding. Jordan, where do you think you're going? To beat the living crap out of that bastard, he shouted, his voice livid, trembling with rage. He laid his hands on you, Mom. He physically assaulted you. I held him back, my grip surprisingly strong, refusing to let him go. Calm down, Jordan. Please. I'm too old, too tired for this kind of physical drama. Then, looking him straight in the eye, I said, my voice quiet but firm, I've made up my mind. I'm handing in my official resignation tomorrow morning. He blinked, stunned into momentary silence. Then, a palpable wave of relief washed over his face, and a wide, genuine grin tugged at the corners of his mouth. Finally, Mom, you've finally come to your senses. I managed a half-hearted, tired smile. The truth was, it wasn't truly about newfound clarity or a sudden epiphany. It was simply that I had been pushed too far. I had no other viable choice left. That night, I sat down at my kitchen table and with a cold, methodical precision, put together a thorough, irrefutable postmortem of the failed project. Every responsibility, every decision, every instance of sabotage and incompetence was clearly, meticulously outlined and attributed. I emailed the entire damning document directly to Steve. If I was walking away, I was drawing the line with indelible ink while I still possessed the capacity to do so. From this point onward, everyone involved would own their own mess, their own failures. As for that so-called six-figure loss he was attempting to pin on me, sorry, Steve. Go chase your brilliant hand-picked little team of relatives for that. And I wasn't stopping there. I was immediately filing for labor arbitration. After all, Steve owed me substantial back pay from the last 2 years of unpaid overtime and systematically docked wages, a sum well into the six-figure range. There was no way in hell I was letting that slide. When I informed Jordan of my plans, he immediately offered to connect me with a top-notch, aggressive labor attorney he knew. He even, with a warmth that touched me deeply, officially invited me to join his company in a senior advisory role. "Mom, if you're willing, I'll have your new office ready by tomorrow." I nodded and smiled, a genuine smile this time. "I'd like that very much, Jordan." Jordan's company was a completely different world, a breath of fresh, invigorating air. So many of the old, valued colleagues Steve had so callously driven out were already working there, their talents recognized, their contributions valued. Seeing their familiar, friendly faces again, working alongside them in an environment of mutual respect and shared purpose was unexpectedly, profoundly heartwarming. That evening, Jordan took me out for a celebratory dinner. Between bites of delicious food and sips of excellent wine, he laughed and said, "Steve truly had it coming, Mom. Every single core team member he unceremoniously pushed out is now working with me. And you probably haven't heard the latest, but I just landed a major city infrastructure contract last month." He looked so incredibly proud, his eyes shining, just like he did as a young boy when he'd come home from school, clutching an award, beaming with accomplishment, eagerly waiting for my praise. As for Steve and me, we were well past the point of no return. He tried, predictably, to stick me with the entire blame for the project loss, publicly demanding I pay for the damages, while behind the scenes, he was already cynically planning to use that same disputed money to spoil his precious little secretary, Vanessa. What he hadn't counted on, however, was that I'd come thoroughly prepared. Long before I officially resigned, I had already compiled a detailed, irrefutable accountability report on the entire failed project. Every budget overrun, every missed deadline, every critical execution failure was clearly documented, time-stamped, and unequivocally assigned to the responsible parties, namely, his unqualified, nepotistically hired team, not me. I sent that comprehensive report not only to Steve but also to every single shareholder on the company's board. That single document sent shockwaves reverberating through the entire company. Combined with my lawyer's aggressive arbitration filing, it finally, decisively, knocked the wind out of Steve's arrogant sails. He had no viable choice left but to pay me every last cent of the substantial wages he owed me. But I wasn't quite finished with him yet. I also filed a separate medical compensation claim for the assault. The monetary amount wasn't particularly large, but I didn't care about the money in that instance. I just wanted to watch him squirm, to make him face the consequences of his actions. Rumor has it he slammed the table so hard he shattered his expensive crystal water carafe and threw his phone against the wall the minute he received the official notice. He even, pathetically, started making veiled threats, bragging to anyone who would listen that he'd somehow steal one of our upcoming contracts and crush Jordan's company into oblivion. The moment I heard that, my face went cold. I had worked in his company, at his side, for 3 full decades. I knew exactly what kind of man he was beneath that polished, superficial facade. Turning on me was one thing, despicable as it was. But coming for my son, threatening his future, that crossed a line. That was a declaration of war he would live to regret. I immediately sat down with Jordan and brought up the upcoming Metro Ring project, a highly lucrative city development. I told him, unequivocally, that I wanted full, direct control of our company's bidding process for this specific contract. I was going to face Steve myself, in person. I wanted to look him directly in the eye and see exactly how he planned to take us down. The Metro Ring project was a major urban transit loop initiative, spearheaded by the city government, with a projected late-phase budget climbing well into the tens of millions. When I stepped into the crowded, tension-filled bidding hall on the designated day, the first thing I saw was Steve and his ever-present secretary, Vanessa, seated directly across the room. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken animosity. Seeing your adversary face to face after such a bitter parting always is. Steve spotted me and immediately put on a painfully fake, overly friendly grin, raising his voice just enough to be heard by the surrounding attendees. Well, well, if it isn't our esteemed company's old guard. Sarah, darling, long time no see. You switching careers now, planning to become a high-priced consultant, perhaps? Vanessa let out a sharp, disdainful little scoff, chiming in with a smirk, her voice dripping with condescension. Mr. Hamilton, why on earth would you waste your precious breath? Nobody owes any particular face or deference to someone who got themselves summarily fired these days. Do they? I calmly brushed an imaginary speck of lint off my tailored blazer sleeve and replied, my voice cool, steady, and carrying clearly across the room. Steve, I truly have to hand it to you. You're really living your best life, aren't you? The forced smile froze, then melted from his face, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fury. Are you threatening me, Sarah? He muttered, his voice low, guttural, his eyes flaring with rage. I gave him a dry, dismissive chuckle. Please, Steve, don't flatter yourself. If I actually had the time or inclination for such activities, I certainly wouldn't waste them on you. Vanessa leaned in close to him then, pasting on a sugary, cloying smile, and whispered in his ear, loud enough for me to overhear, baby. Don't even bother with her. She's just a washed-up, bitter has-been. We're here today to win this lucrative contract, not to argue with irrelevant nobodies. She batted her eyelashes coquettishly and patted his arm with a proprietary air, as if she were calming a petulant, spoiled child. And, like clockwork, Steve's temper visibly cooled a bit. He gave a little cough, straightened his tie, and said, with a renewed attempt at composure, You are quite right, my dear. She's not worth our energy. Let's remain focused on the prize. The hall was filled with representatives from various construction and engineering firms, but in reality, only two were serious contenders for this massive project. Steve's company, Hamilton Construction, and my son's rapidly ascending firm Miller and Company. The rest were largely there to observe, to learn, perhaps to pick up some smaller, ancillary contracts. Once the official bidding process began, the city's project office unexpectedly threw in a curveball. To, as they termed it, improve overall project efficiency and foster healthy competition. They announced they would be splitting the massive contract into two distinct parts. Phase A, encompassing the initial heavy construction and foundational work, and Phase B, covering the final completion, systems integration, and finishing touches. Each phase, they declared, would be awarded to a separate, independent firm. Phase A, the more substantial and arguably more critical portion, went to us, to Miller and Company. Phase B was awarded to Steve. His face darkened on the spot, a look of utter disbelief and then dawning fury spreading across his features. He had clearly set his sights on securing the entire project, on delivering a decisive blow. Getting only half, and the less prestigious half at that, was a public rebuke that stung more than any private censure. Then the lead city official delivered the final crushing blow. We've heard some rather concerning reports about your company's recent project failure, Mr. Hamilton, he stated, his tone devoid of warmth. This Metro Ring initiative is a critical piece of infrastructure for our city. We simply cannot afford another significant risk, another costly delay. If you genuinely wish to remain in the game for Phase B, you will need to unequivocally prove to us that you are serious, that you are capable. Otherwise, he paused for emphasis, we are more than happy to give newer, more agile teams a chance to demonstrate their capabilities. The room went stone-cold silent. I kept my head down, pretending to flip through my presentation notes, but I could feel my lips twitching with a barely suppressed amusement. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Steve's jaw tighten so hard I thought he might actually snap a molar. Some debts, I mused silently, don't need aggressive collecting. Life, in its own inimitable way, has a rather effective method of settling the score. But the truly best part, the delicious icing on the cake, came a month later. I was just arriving at the office, coffee in hand, when Jordan burst in, his face alight, practically shaking with barely contained laughter. Mom, I've got something absolutely hilarious to tell you. You will not believe what Steve did last night. I raised an eyebrow, deliberately not taking the bait, maintaining my composure. Oh? And what might that be, Jordan? Did he attempt to sneak into our office and try to steal our project plans, perhaps? Jordan dragged me insistently towards a chair, practically vibrating with excitement, lowering his voice conspiratorially, as if he couldn't wait to spill the juicy details. He called up one of our former employees, remember Michael, the lead engineer he forced out last year? Started grilling him with highly technical questions, like he was utterly desperate for information. And guess what Michael told him? What? I prompted, intrigued despite myself. Michael said, "What, Steve? You don't have any competent engineers left on your payroll? You're actually reduced to calling someone you unceremoniously fired for help?" Steve apparently panicked, started begging Michael, said if he helped him out of this jam, he'd pay him $50,000 in consulting fees. Michael agreed on the spot, took the money up front via wire transfer, and then immediately agreed on the spot, took the money. I laughed out loud then, a genuine, hearty laugh, gently swirling the coffee in my mug. Serves him right. That entire old crew. Steve worked them like dogs for years, extracted every last ounce of their talent and loyalty, and then tossed them out like yesterday's trash when they were no longer convenient. Jordan was clearly amused, but a flicker of genuine concern then crossed his face. Still, Mom, $50,000 is no joke. What if Steve accuses our guy, Michael, of extortion? If he drags this whole project into a messy legal battle, we could inadvertently take a significant hit. I waved his concerns away, calm as ever. Don't worry, Jordan. I know those folks. None of them are pushovers, and certainly none of them make foolish, impulsive moves. They're smarter than that. And sure enough, Steve apparently threw a monumental tantrum behind closed doors, fuming and threatening. But ultimately, he swallowed his pride and his loss in the end. It turned out, as I suspected, that he still owed Michael, that former employee, a substantial portion of his severance package. If this messy situation ever made it to court, not only would Steve have to cough up hefty lawyer fees, but he might very well end up owing Michael, and potentially others, even more, in back pay and damages. That's when a thought, a nascent idea, sparked in my mind. Maybe, just maybe, this was my window of opportunity. So I invited a few trusted old colleagues, others who had suffered similar injustices under Steve, out for coffee. Together, we compiled a comprehensive, meticulously documented list of all the employees Steve had systematically stiffed over the years: unpaid wages, denied benefits, unfulfilled contractual obligations, everything he owed them. I personally fronted the initial legal retainer fees, and everyone else enthusiastically chipped in to cover the remaining costs. Together, united by a shared sense of grievance, we filed a class action lawsuit. The moment I brought up the idea, people were unanimously, overwhelmingly, all in, both hands metaphorically raised in fervent support. Everyone in the industry knew the kind of man Steve truly was. Years ago, some might still have held back, perhaps out of a misplaced sense of loyalty, or more likely, out of fear of reprisal. But no longer. He was now a pariah, a walking scandal, a symbol of corporate greed and mismanagement. People couldn't wait to help bring him down. While our firm, Miller and Company, was surging ahead, full steam, on the new Metro Ring project, Steve's professional world was rapidly, spectacularly unraveling. He was constantly dodging court dates, desperately scrambling to find outside contractors, any available warm body, to fill the gaping holes left by his so-called team of relatives. The family members he'd so generously pulled in through those nepotistic ties, well, they were perfectly fine sipping expensive lattes in the office, posing for endless selfies, and updating their social media statuses. But ask them to actually draft a coherent project proposal or run a complex technical audit. You might as well have asked a chicken to perform a pole dance. The results would have been equally ludicrous. But truthfully, even all of that, the public humiliation, the financial losses, the legal entanglements, wasn't quite enough to fully satisfy the cold knot of anger that still resided deep within me. Then, it hit me. Melody, Steve's wife. I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd nearly lost his composure, his carefully constructed facade cracking, when I jabbed him about still dating a 20-something secretary during that contentious bid meeting. That look on his face, that flicker of raw panic, had stayed with me. And that, I realized, gave me an idea. I reached out to Melody Hamilton, Steve's one and only legal wife. To be perfectly honest, when I saw her again after all those years, I wasn't entirely prepared for her presence. She hadn't changed one bit, still carried herself with that same quiet, formidable power, that aura of unshakable self-possession. She had to be close to 60 now, yet she was dressed in a flawlessly tailored black dress, with a crisp white shirt, her cropped silver-gray hair styled in a way that made her look effortlessly, almost intimidatingly, sharp. The moment she stepped into the quiet upscale cafe I had chosen for our meeting, the entire place seemed to collectively hush, heads turning subtly in her direction. She sat down across from me, her movements precise, economical, her voice steady, devoid of any discernible emotion. "Sarah, what made you reach out after all this time? It's been, what? Years since we last spoke, isn't it?" I nodded. "Yes, Melody. Not since you stepped back from active involvement in the company." Her expression tightened, ever so slightly, the only outward sign of any internal reaction. "So why now? What is it, precisely, that you want from me?" I offered what I hoped was a calm, reassuring smile, and slid my smartphone across the polished surface of the table between us. "Relax, Melody. I'm not here to stir up unnecessary trouble, truly. I just wanted to show you something. Everything I need to say, everything you might need to know, is right here." She hesitated for a moment, her gaze appraising, then tapped the screen. Image after image flashed by, damning screenshots of intimate messages between Steve and Vanessa, covertly taken photos of them, meeting up in secret at out-of-the-way restaurants and boutique hotels, copies of credit card records detailing extravagant purchases, receipts for expensive gifts. I waited, observing her closely, expecting at least a flicker of outrage, a hint of betrayal. But Melody, true to form, didn't flinch. Her eyes, cool and detached, scanned the screen with an almost clinical dispassion. There was perhaps some surprise in her expression, maybe even a fleeting flicker of disdain, but not the profound shock, the searing humiliation, or the incandescent fury I had secretly, perhaps unkindly, anticipated. She locked the phone, handed it back to me, and said flatly, her voice perfectly even, "So, you brought me all the way here, to this rather public place, just to show me that?" Her unexpected reaction threw me completely off balance. I hesitated, regrouping. "Well, not just that, Melody, but—" She cut me off, her tone cool and clipped, leaving no room for argument. "Whatever Steve is doing out there, Sarah, whatever sordid little affairs he chooses to engage in, that is entirely his business. It has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with me." It wasn't mere indifference in her voice. It was something far colder, far more profound, the chilling detachment of a woman who had already braved the very worst storms life could throw at her, and had emerged, not unscathed perhaps, but frozen, hardened. "When I married him, Sarah," she continued, her gaze unwavering, "I already knew, with absolute certainty, that this day, or one very much like it, would eventually come. None of this, none of your carefully compiled evidence, surprises me in the slightest." In that moment, I finally understood why she hadn't so much as blinked at the proof of her husband's infidelity. There were unspoken things, entire volumes of experience, contained within her quiet composure, but I heard them, loud and clear. Back when the company was still in its precarious infancy, she, Steve, and I had formed its core. The three of us were widely known in the industry as the Iron Triangle. We had taken on the toughest, most demanding clients, navigated the ugliest, most contentious deals, side by side, an unbreakable team. She had possessed a brilliant, promising career of her own, until her late 30s, when she had suddenly, inexplicably to many, stepped back from it all and married Steve, who was by then the company's CEO. I had never quite understood her decision then. She could have married anyone, someone who saw her as an equal, a partner, someone who would have built her up, championed her ambitions, instead of gradually, systematically boxing her in. Instead, she had chosen to marry the man who later, predictably, turned her into a glorified, if wealthy, housewife, and then, just as predictably, cheated on her. But maybe, in her clear-eyed, pragmatic view of the world, I was the one who didn't truly understand reality. Melody took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee, then spoke again, her voice as calm and measured as ever. My first marriage, Sarah, was for love. It didn't end well. When our financial circumstances improved significantly, the love, or what I had mistaken for it, simply disappeared. And so did he. He cheated, took half of everything, and vanished. This time, she stated, her gaze direct, almost challenging. I chose not to be that kind of sentimental fool again. I nodded slowly, a strange, unexpected sense of admiration for her brutal clarity, her unvarnished honesty, beginning to form. You're remarkably honest, Melody, and undeniably practical. But her next sentence, delivered with that same unnerving calm, made the air in the cafe suddenly go still, charged with an unspoken tension. Only fools, Sarah, allow themselves to be used as weapons by others. Don't you agree? My heart skipped a beat. Before I could formulate a response, she put her cup down with a precise, deliberate gesture and continued, her eyes never leaving mine. I've heard the stories, of course, about that disastrously failed project, about you poaching his most valuable staff, his key personnel for your son's burgeoning company. And now you're here, showing me this? The tawdry evidence? What are you hoping for, Sarah? That I'll flip the proverbial table, storm into the office in a jealous rage? She smiled then, a faint, almost imperceptible, chillingly knowing smile, shaking her head slowly. Sarah, I am not the kind of woman who allows her emotions, her feelings, to drag her around, to dictate her actions. He is my husband. I may not love him anymore, may never have truly loved him in the way you imagine, but we are legally, financially, inextricably tied together. You honestly think I would actively help you ruin him, thereby potentially jeopardizing my own carefully constructed security? I opened my mouth, unsure of what I even meant to say, what response I could possibly offer to such cold, calculated pragmatism. But she was already standing, preparing to leave. She pulled an elegant silk handkerchief from her designer handbag and delicately dabbed at her perfectly lipsticked mouth. It appears, Sarah, she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly, perhaps with a hint of something akin to pity, that you came to the wrong woman today. Then, without another word, she picked up her untouched glass of iced water and slowly, deliberately tipped it forward, pouring half a cup of ice-cold water directly onto the polished table in front of me. It splashed up, soaking the sleeve of my expensive silk blouse. I sat there in stunned silence, watching her walk away, her posture erect, her departure as coolly composed as her arrival. And I realized then, with a sudden startling clarity, that sometimes it's not about abstract notions of right or wrong, of justice or revenge. Sometimes it's simply about direction. Melody and I, despite our shared history with Steve, were never, ever walking the same path. She had consciously, deliberately chosen security over emotion. She had placed her bet, all those years ago, on a life that, while perhaps emotionally barren, wouldn't change too much, wouldn't surprise her with its messy unpredictability. And maybe, just maybe, I needed to respect that choice, even if it was a choice I, personally, could never, ever make for myself. Even though Melody had unequivocally turned down my implicit offer to team up against Steve, I wasn't about to simply back down, to abandon my quest for a more comprehensive form of justice. That little, insistent voice inside me, the one that had always pushed me to strive, to achieve, came knocking again. Why not start something of your own, Sarah? Something new, something better? So I did. Right after that illuminating, if unsettling, meeting with Melody, I threw myself, with renewed vigor, into the Metro Ring project. If I genuinely wanted to go head-to-head with Steve, to truly demonstrate his obsolescence, the most direct, most effective way was to ensure our company's portion of that critical contract was completed flawlessly, impeccably, and significantly ahead of schedule, to show the entire industry, unequivocally, who the real professionals were. Steve's company, Hamilton Construction, was by then practically a hollow shell, a Potemkin village of an enterprise. That last disastrously failed job had already severely scorched his professional reputation. If this Metro Ring project also collapsed under his mismanagement, there wouldn't be much left of Hamilton Construction at all, perhaps just a footnote in the annals of failed businesses. Jordan and I, along with our veteran, highly skilled team, many of whom were, ironically, Steve's former star employees, worked around the clock, fueled by caffeine and a shared sense of purpose. We meticulously revised blueprints, rebuilt complex models from scratch, polished every single intricate detail until it gleamed with perfection. When we finally submitted our comprehensive final version of the phase, a plan to the city's rigorous review board, they barely requested any significant changes, merely offering a stamp of enthusiastic approval and the immediate green light to break ground. Our firm had been awarded Phase A, the initial, most challenging leg of the Metro Ring project. We hit every crucial milestone not just on time, but often ahead of schedule, consistently exceeded all expectations, and earned glowing, public reviews from the city officials and engineering oversight committees. Then came Phase B, Steve's half. 3 months into his portion of the work, the city had already been forced to send multiple official warnings, citing significant delays in substandard work. But Steve's side had yet to deliver anything truly meaningful, anything tangible. Half of his already depleted technical team had walked out in disgust, unwilling to be associated with another impending failure. He couldn't afford to hire qualified replacements, his company's finances being in such dire straits. And when he tried, in desperation, crawling back to the old crew, the experienced engineers he had so arrogantly dismissed, they expertly bled him for exorbitant consulting fees, and then promptly ghosted him the moment the checks cleared. He attempted to outsource what critical work he could, but that only led to more debilitating headaches, more costly errors, and further delays. And then Melody, his pragmatic, long-suffering wife, finally lost her legendary patience. Word quickly got around the tight-knit industry circles that she had stormed into his private office, unannounced, threw a thick, meticulously organized folder full of incriminating receipts onto his desk, and, with ice in her voice, had stated, "Every single dollar you have squandered on that girl, on Vanessa, I want it back." Or she had paused for dramatic effect, "I will personally inform your entire extended family, including your rather formidable Cusin, family been covering exactly when it extended." Steve was utterly, completely cornered. And Vanessa, it was now widely known, wasn't just some anonymous side fling. She was, in fact, his distant cousin's daughter. Not immediate family, perhaps, but close enough that if this sordid scandal truly exploded into the public domain, it wouldn't just irrevocably wreck Steve's already tattered name. It could very well drag that entire influential branch of the family through the inescapable mud. And that particular cousin, a woman renowned for her sharp tongue and vengeful nature, would undoubtedly make Steve pay dearly. If not in cash, then most certainly in blood. So now, he was desperately juggling a catastrophically failing project, a crumbling illicit relationship, multiple ongoing legal battles, a devastating public image fallout, and impending financial collapse, all in under 90 chaotic days. He was visibly, rapidly unraveling. But above all else, the biggest, most immediate threat was still the Metro Ring project. If he couldn't somehow deliver Phase B, it wasn't just a simple breach of contract fine he'd be facing. His company's entire reputation would tank, irretrievably. And in this town, reputation is everything. No one, absolutely no one, hires a sinking ship. And when a giant in the industry finally falls, the vacuum left behind inevitably turns into a voracious, brutal feeding frenzy. There are no permanent winners in the cutthroat world of business, no eternal, unwavering allies. I watched it all unfold, this slow-motion implosion of Steve's career, and for once, surprisingly, I didn't feel that familiar, sharp urge to twist the knife, to exact further revenge. Instead, I remembered what Melody had told me, her words echoing in my mind. Sometimes, when one person burns, the whole forest catches fire. If Steve went down completely, spectacularly, sure, Miller and Company would undoubtedly look like the triumphant victor, the conquering hero. But in the long term, simply taking out a familiar, if flailing, rival might just inadvertently open the door for someone younger, hungrier, and far more ruthless to enter the fray. So, I took that unsettling thought to Jordan. His reaction was immediate, visceral. "You're seriously suggesting we help Steve, Mom? Have you completely forgotten what that man did to you? The unpaid overtime, the systematically missing paychecks, the way he publicly scapegoated you for his own failures? He hit you, Mom. He physically assaulted you, and now you want to help that man?" His voice rose, gaining speed and intensity, like he was already seeing the victory banner, our company's logo emblazoned upon it, unfurled across the city skyline. "This is our golden shot. If he fails this project, and he will fail, we can step in, take over the whole damn thing. We could control the entire metro ring." Jordan stood, walked over to the large window, overlooking the bustling city, and stared out for a few long, contemplative seconds. When he finally turned back around, his voice had lost its earlier fiery impetuosity, but had gained something sharper, more considered. "I get it now, Mom. We're not actually helping him because we're suddenly feeling kind or forgiving. We're helping him because we understand how the game is truly played. At the highest level." "Precisely," I affirmed, giving him a subtle thumbs up. "We'll still earn our bonuses from the city for ensuring project continuity. We'll gain an invaluable goodwill from all stakeholders. And most importantly, we'll further solidify our reputation as a company people genuinely want to work with. United, professional, exceptionally reliable. Tell me, Jordan, who wouldn't want to partner with a team like that?" That night, Jordan called in a few of our lead engineers, our most trusted strategists, for an emergency, late-night meeting. We spent 2 intense hours huddled around the large conference table, meticulously going over feasibility studies, mapping out potential risks, assigning critical responsibilities. Every single detail was scrutinized, every conceivable possibility debated, every contingency planned for. In the end, the decision was unanimous. We would step in discreetly and help Steve's beleaguered company wrap up Phase B of the Metro Ring project. The next morning, I called him myself. The moment he picked up, his voice raspy and defeated, he let out a long, drawn-out, weary sigh. "Sarah, you're here to rub it in, I presume? Don't worry, save your breath. I'm already prepping the paperwork to shut the whole damn place down. It's over." I gave a quiet, almost gentle laugh. "Not so fast, Steve. I have a proposal for you. Something I think you'll definitely want to hear." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then came the unmistakable sound of disbelief, of a desperate hope cracking through his despair. You're serious? You're actually willing to help me?" "We are," I said calmly. "But please, don't for a moment mistake this for charity, Steve. This is business." Of course. Name your terms. Anything." I could practically hear him nodding frantically through the receiver, and the corners of my mouth lifted in a small, almost imperceptible smile. This wasn't just about bailing him out of his current mess. This was about subtly, strategically, taking the wheel. Once the new, meticulously drafted terms of our partnership were locked in, legally binding, we shifted gears and moved into the final, intensive sprint. On paper, Miller and Company was merely assisting Hamilton Construction with the completion of Phase B, but in truth, we were quietly, efficiently, taking the lead, directing operations, managing resources, ensuring quality control. When the city officials finally learned, through carefully managed channels, that our firm had effectively partnered with Steve's to complete the full Metro Ring project, their reaction was one of surprised but undeniable approval. They had clearly expected a messy, protracted corporate bloodbath, a typical winner-takes-all outcome. Instead, they got seamless cooperation, unexpected synergy, and ultimately a flawless, on-time project delivery. And as far as they were concerned, that made Jordan Miller, my son, a dynamic young leader worth betting on for future, even larger, endeavors. Because, to the city, it had never really mattered who specifically got the contract. What mattered, fundamentally, were results. On time, high quality, and absolutely no unnecessary drama. When the project finally successfully wrapped, Steve's company had managed, just barely, to scrape through what could easily have been its ignominious final chapter. But his personal storm, I knew, was far from over. Melody, true to her pragmatic nature, showed up at his office, unannounced once again, and slammed a thick, foreboding binder onto his desk. The ledger within was detailed, brutal, and irrefutable. Every dollar he had recklessly spent on Vanessa, every frivolous, unjustifiable expense, meticulously traced, documented, and printed out in stark black and white. She gave him two, and only two, options. Either immediately transfer fully half of the company's shares directly to her, or cough up, in cash, every single cent he had wasted on his mistress and his coterie of incompetent, freeloading relatives. Steve was reportedly shaking with impotent fury, but he possessed absolutely no leverage, no room to maneuver. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that if Melody took this sordid mess public, the company's already severely battered image would collapse completely, beyond any hope of recovery. He caved. Quietly, resentfully, he signed over 50% of Hamilton Construction to her. He even, under duress, drafted a new will, stipulating that his remaining share of the business would go entirely to their estranged son. And with us, Miller and Company, formally withdrawing our arbitration request as part of our cooperation agreement, Steve managed, just barely, to patch up the gaping financial and legal holes that had threatened to swallow him whole. Maybe, just maybe, it was the first time in months he could actually breathe something akin to a sigh of relief. He even, rather audaciously, invited Jordan and me to a formal dinner, ostensibly to celebrate the project's success and to show his profound gratitude for our timely intervention. But I didn't go. I hadn't forgotten what he did. Not the endless, uncompensated late nights he had forced upon me. Not the systematically withheld wages. Not the constant, public humiliation. And most certainly not the day he threw that heavy file folder at my face, drawing blood, leaving a scar that was more than just skin deep. I had helped him, yes, but only because it strategically helped me, and more importantly, because it helped my son, Jordan. Not because I had forgiven him, not by a long shot. If it hadn't been the demonstrably smarter, more strategically advantageous move for Miller and Company, I would have gladly, even joyfully, watched his entire corrupt enterprise crash and burn right there on that metro ring job site. A few weeks after the successful project completion, the city issued another major tender, this one even bigger, more complex than the last, with significantly more funding and far greater public visibility. This time, Miller and Company was unequivocally the lead contractor. Steve's firm, Hamilton Construction, now effectively Melody's, was listed merely as a secondary, almost token, partner. We got the meat of the contract. He was thrown the scraps. Resources, control, profits, reputation, everything, absolutely everything, had shifted. And just like that, almost imperceptibly to the outside world, Jordan's company became the new industry benchmark, the standard by which all others were measured. Poor Steve. He was still out there, pathetically clinging to old, faded favors, desperately trying to stay relevant in a game that had long since passed him by. That night, he called me, out of the blue. He asked if I'd meet him for dinner, said he just wanted to catch up like old friends. I figured it would be more business talk, perhaps some desperate plea related to the new project. But the place he picked caught me completely off guard. A little, unpretentious street corner barbecue joint that had been a neighborhood fixture for over a decade. Slightly run down, always noisy, but imbued with an undeniable warmth. One of those unassuming places that tugs at your heartstrings with a potent, unexpected nostalgia. What I truly didn't expect was that he had brought Melody along with him. "This place ring any bells, Sarah?" Steve said, a forced joviality in his tone, as he personally poured me a glass of craft beer, grinning like we were suddenly 20 years younger, all the intervening bitterness magically erased. That year when we couldn't make payroll, remember? We had dinner right here, at this very table. I nodded, accepting the drink, a strange sense of unreality washing over me. Of course I remember, Steve. You bought Melody and me the house special steak sandwich that night, swore up and down with such youthful conviction that we'd all be rich one day. Steve laughed, his eyes crinkling at the corners, a genuine, almost boyish sound. We didn't know much back then, did we? Just wanted to land the next job, survive another quarter. Nobody really had their guard up. I took a slow sip of the beer, my voice steady as ever. You can thank your lovely former secretary, Vanessa, for changing all that, Steve. If she hadn't spent her days so diligently rallying your relatives to systematically push me out, I might never have left, might never have found this new path. He rushed to agree, nodding furiously, almost too eagerly. You're right, Sarah. Absolutely right. I am so sorry. Here, he raised his glass. This one's on me. He tossed back his beer in a single, theatrical gulp, holding the empty glass upside down like a triumphant child, trying to prove had really finished it all. He could be such a complete, exasperating fool sometimes. I raised my own glass with a wry, knowing smile. To friendship, then, or what remains of it. Melody, seated silently beside me, watched us toast, her face an unreadable mask, somewhere between reflective and deeply restrained. Then, just as things started to feel oddly, almost uncomfortably, civil, Steve abruptly stood up, a look of exaggerated panic on his face. Oh, I completely forgot. I have to feed the dog. He turned to Melody, his eyes wide with a mock urgency that was utterly unconvincing. Honey, you stay here, please. Catch up with Sarah properly. I've just got to run home and take care of the pup. Be right back. I blinked, bewildered. Since when do you even have a dog, Steve? But he was already brushing off my hand, backing away with a nervous grin, making a hasty, almost comical exit without looking back. I was still trying to figure out what kind of bizarre stunt he was attempting to pull, when Melody scooted her chair just a little closer. She held her wine glass with an accustomed grace, the tilt of her posture calm, perfectly composed, but there was a new sharpness in her gaze, a focused intensity that I didn't miss. She took a slow, deliberate sip, then set the glass down with meticulous care. Jordan's doing exceptionally well, Sarah. He's a remarkably smart, capable young man. I turned towards her, but didn't respond immediately. Our company, Miller and Company, has grown incredibly fast under his leadership, she added, watching me carefully, her eyes appraising. I stayed quiet. She paused, then continued, her voice even. He possesses your decisiveness, Sarah, your strategic mind, but also a younger generation's drive, their fearless embrace of innovation. I finally replied, my voice carefully neutral. So, this rather elaborate dinner was arranged merely to compliment my son, Melody? She shook her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. No, Sarah. I came to talk business. Her eyes met mine directly then, holding my gaze. You can see it as clearly as I can. Steve is running on fumes. He acts as if this is still a viable partnership, but in reality, he's scrambling, desperately trying to regain some semblance of control. Then she said, quite plainly, her voice dropping almost imperceptibly, I am not going to stand by and watch him drag the company, our company, into the ground. And I certainly will not allow my son to end up broke, his future jeopardized because of his father's incompetence and pride. I raised an eyebrow. So, you want me to go easy on him? To prop him up? No, she said, her voice even, unwavering. I want you to seriously consider forming a joint operational division, one led by both our sons. Jordan, naturally, taking the overall lead, with my son Kevin working alongside him, learning from him. I will personally ensure that Steve stays entirely out of it, that he doesn't interfere. I didn't answer right away. I picked up my water glass, took a slow, contemplative sip. She gave me a few seconds, then continued, her argument well rehearsed. I know this might seem like an additional burden to you, Sarah, to Jordan. But in the long term, it's also a valuable challenge, a growth opportunity for Jordan too. He needs to learn how to effectively manage a teammate he didn't personally choose, how to equitably balance resources, how to navigate real, unavoidable friction within a leadership dynamic. I set the glass down quietly. My voice was low, but direct. This sounds a lot more like you actively looking for a secure safety net for your own son, Melody. She didn't flinch, didn't deny it. Half of it, yes, perhaps. But I'm not asking you to simply hand him your company on a silver platter. I am merely trying to keep him from being completely shut out of the market, from being left with nothing when Steve finally crashes and burns completely. I looked at her. And your company? Hamilton Construction? We're not selling, she answered quickly, decisively. But we are restructuring, significantly. How it evolves from this point forward, its ultimate success or failure, depends almost entirely on what those two young men, Jordan and Kevin, can build together. I nodded slightly, acknowledging her strategic acumen. You've played this entire game very well, Melody. Effectively sacrificing Steve's pride to secure your son's future. She remained perfectly calm. I'm simply doing what any mother in my position is supposed to do. There was a considerable pause before I finally replied, my voice softened by a reluctant understanding, but still firm. I will consider your proposal, Melody, but understand this clearly. Jordan is someone I raised from practically nothing, someone I have poured my life into. I will not allow anyone, not even you, to treat his trust, his future, like some casual experiment, some expendable pawn in a larger game. Melody nodded, her expression serious. Understood, Sarah. Everything would be entirely above board, completely open and fair, fully transparent. Kevin will know the precise terms of the arrangement from the very start. And we, you and I, will cooperate completely as partners. By then, the lights outside the small restaurant had dimmed to a soft, mellow yellow. The ambient sounds of the city street buzzed faintly through the open windows, a counterpoint to our quiet, intense conversation. I didn't say yes. But then again, I didn't say no either. That night, as I walked home through the cool, deserted streets, my mind kept circling back to Melody's carefully chosen words, to her unexpected, audacious proposal. And I couldn't stop wondering, was this brilliant strategy or merely shrewd, desperate survival? The next morning, I had just poured myself a fresh, steaming cup of coffee when Jordan walked into my office. He spotted me staring absently into space and narrowed his eyes, a knowing look on his face. Okay, Mom, what are you thinking about now? I recognized that look. I slid the heavy ceramic mug across the polished expanse of my desk to him and said calmly, Melody Hamilton talked to me last night, Jordan. He went on high alert immediately, his posture straightening. What does she want this time? I didn't sugarcoat it. She wants you to partner with her son, Kevin, on the next major project. A small, integrated team. You would take the definitive lead, of course. Her son would work directly under your supervision. She claims she'll stay on the sidelines, merely keeping an eye on things from a distance. Jordan frowned on the spot, his displeasure evident. Is she kidding me? What can that kid even do? I'm already stretched incredibly thin managing my own crew. You seriously expect me to babysit her spoiled son's delicate feelings as well? I gave a soft, almost imperceptible laugh, and didn't respond right away. He pressed on, his frustration mounting. Mom, you didn't actually say yes to this ridiculous proposition, did you? I looked him directly in the eye. No, Jordan, I didn't. But I do want you to hear her out, to seriously consider it. He looked genuinely confused then, his brow furrowing. Hear it out? Why? What exactly is there to consider? Our company is just now truly finding its footing, gaining serious traction in the market. Why on earth should we just hand out golden opportunities to someone who clearly hasn't earned them? Her son, Kevin, he's got absolutely no track record, no real-world experience, no valuable connections to speak of. What, precisely, is he bringing to the table? I leaned back in my chair, my gaze steady, and spoke gently. Did it ever occur to you, Jordan, that this proposal from Melody's perspective isn't actually about the project itself? It's about her attempting to secure a viable future for her son, a future that won't completely collapse under him when Steve finally implodes. That's her problem, Mom, not ours, he said bluntly, his tone dismissive. I nodded. It is. You're right. But you also need to start thinking bigger, Jordan, more strategically. How long do you realistically plan to keep winning solely by pushing others out of your way? By outmaneuvering them in head-to-head confrontations? Jordan still looked puzzled, unconvinced. What are you getting at, Mom? So I laid it out for him, clearly, concisely. Melody came to us, to you, because she knows Steve is finished, a spent force. And also, crucially, because she knows you've got what it takes to succeed, to lead. But don't allow yourself to get too comfortable, Jordan. There are countless others out there younger than you, far hungrier than you, and willing to burn twice as hard, twice as ruthlessly to get to the top. Right now, we're winning primarily because we're solid, really hope we deliver. Not because we're solid, really hope. He took a slow sip of his coffee, his expression quieter now, more thoughtful. I continued, pressing my advantage. If you agree to bring her son into the team, under your direct command, but you are still unequivocally leading the entire show, then you gain invaluable, real-world practice. Managing a diverse team, setting clear structures and expectations, holding people accountable for their performance, or lack thereof. Not every partnership is about immediate, tangible gain, Jordan. Some are trial runs. Some are... He set his mug down on the desk and finally asked, his voice subdued. So, you essentially want me to take him on as a test, to see if I can actually manage a group effectively, instead of just driving a project forward by myself, through sheer force of will? I nodded. That's precisely when true leadership really begins, Jordan. It's not just about doing the job yourself, however brilliantly. It's about building, mentoring, and inspiring the people who can. He went quiet again for a long moment, then sighed, a sound of reluctant acquiescence. All right, Mom, we give it a shot, but I'm telling you right now, if he slacks off, if he doesn't pull his weight, I am not babysitting him. He's out. I smiled. That's exactly the mindset you need to have, Jordan. That evening, Jordan called a quick, impromptu meeting with our senior tech leads. He laid out the plan for the proposed joint team with Melody's son. Clear, direct, no fluff, no ambiguity. His rule was simple, unshakable. We lead, they support. Anyone, regardless of their background or connections, who shows up ready to work, ready to contribute meaningfully, will get a real, fair shot to stay, to grow with the company. And in that moment, watching him speak with such calm, confident authority, setting the tone not just for one specific job, but for an entire organizational culture, I knew, with a profound sense of maternal pride, that he was truly starting to grow into something more, something remarkable. He wasn't just running a project anymore. He was learning how to build a lasting legacy. The first few days after the joint project team officially launched, the office was buzzing with a nervous, anticipatory energy. Jordan, true to his word, had laid everything out meticulously in advance. Who was responsible for what specific tasks, when critical deliverables were due? Who was assigned to the on-site coordination? Who handled internal and external communications? Everything was mapped out, scheduled down to the precise hour. Steve's company, or rather Melody's now, sent over their designated team on schedule. 3 individuals, all seemingly professional, polite, and reasonably competent. But the one who stood out, unmistakably, for all the wrong reasons, was Steve's son, Kevin. He swaggered in that first morning, dressed in a flashy, ill-fitting suit, dragging a giant, ostentatious Rimowa suitcase behind him, as if he were arriving for an extended vacation rather than a demanding job. Before even bothering to greet anyone, he stopped dramatically in the middle of the hallway to snap a self-congratulatory selfie, which he immediately posted to his various social media platforms with the pompous caption, "New beginnings! #boss life, #making moves." A few of our senior staff members, seasoned professionals who were watching this spectacle unfold from their nearby desks, rolled their eyes so hard you could practically hear the collective groan. At the first official team meeting, Jordan ran things with a brisk, no-nonsense efficiency. He didn't waste words, but his pace was demanding, his directions sharp, clear, and unambiguous. When he got to outlining Kevin's initial responsibilities, he looked him square in the eye and stated, "You'll start by coordinating closely with our materials procurement team and the on-site construction crew. Your primary task will be to learn the entire process, from requisition to delivery to implementation. I want a complete detailed inventory tracking list from you by the end of this month." Kevin didn't bother to hide his immediate annoyance, his lip curling in a disdainful sneer. "I rather thought I was here for something more substantial than just grunt work." Jordan didn't even look up from his notes. He simply moved on smoothly with the rest of the meeting agenda, leaving Kevin's petulant remark hanging unanswered in the air. Afterward, Kevin was in the break room, stirring his coffee with unnecessary vigor, grumbling just loud enough for anyone within earshot to overhear. "So, I'm just the glorified office errand boy now, is that it?" One of his own teammates, a slightly older, more experienced engineer from Hamilton Construction, nudged him gently, discreetly. "Keep your voice down, Kev. Things move incredibly fast around here. And trust me, if you screw this up, not even your mother, with all her influence, will be able to cover for you." Kevin didn't reply, but that afternoon, when he sullenly turned in his first attempt at the materials list, it wasn't even half a page long, riddled with errors and omissions. Jordan flipped through it quickly, his expression unreadable, then handed it back to Kevin without raising his voice, his tone perfectly even. "Take it back and redo it, properly this time. This job, Kevin, is clearly not as easy as it looks from the outside." Kevin snatched the paper back, his jaw tight with resentment, his face dark with suppressed anger, and stormed off. I happened to be upstairs, near the large picture window overlooking the main project office, and saw the whole brief, telling exchange. He came out of that meeting room with metaphorical fire in his eyes, his lips pressed into a thin, hard line. Meanwhile, Jordan stayed put at his desk, calmly sorting through a stack of unrelated files, as if nothing of any consequence had just occurred. After just 1 week on the project, Kevin was already visibly cracking under the pressure. He had a laundry list of complaints, which he voiced frequently and to anyone who would listen. He had to do everything, he whined. He was expected to learn everything too quickly. No one cared about his valuable opinions in team meetings. His work assignments were always the boring grunt stuff. Endless site visits, tedious report rewrites, frustrating logistics runs. To him, it felt like one long, deliberate setup, a conspiracy designed to make him fail. That Friday, just before the close of the business day, he called Melody and insisted she meet him immediately. They sat at a quiet corner table in a nearby upscale cafe for almost 2 hours. "Mom, he doesn't respect me at all," Kevin said, trying to keep his voice low, but his words were seething with a barely suppressed rage. "Jordan treats me like some lowly intern. He constantly sends me out for pointless field checks, piles me with the most mind-numbingly boring administrative tasks. And then, to add insult to injury, he calls me out, humiliates me in front of the entire team." Melody didn't say anything, just listened patiently, her expression unreadable. Kevin kept going, his voice rising with each perceived injustice. "Didn't you tell me this was supposed to be a genuine growth opportunity for me? That I'd finally get a real chance to show what I can actually do? He's just waiting for me to mess up, Mom. I know it. So he can push me out, get rid of me." He leaned in across the small table, his voice now trembling with emotion. "Mom, aren't you going to step in? Say something to him? Defend me?" Melody let out a long, slow sigh. "Kevin," she began, her voice even almost gentle, "you are my son, and I will always, always be in your corner, supporting you. But right now, Kevin, you are working at someone else's company, under someone else's command. And if you don't learn to follow their rules, their procedures, you simply won't learn to follow their rules, their procedures. You..." Kevin froze, clearly not expecting her to take that particular line. His face fell, his earlier bluster deflating like a punctured balloon. "What?" "What are you saying, Mom?" "I'm saying," she replied, her tone still even, but now undeniably firm, "that maybe, just maybe, it's time you learned how to adapt, Kevin, instead of constantly expecting everyone else in the world to bend and contort themselves around you." Her tone wasn't harsh, but it was unmistakably, uncompromisingly honest. Kevin stared at her for a long moment, then scoffed, stood up abruptly, and walked out of the cafe, leaving his expensive untouched latte growing cold on the table between them. That evening, Melody couldn't quite shake her burgeoning worry. She knew her son's temperament all too well: impatient, incredibly prideful, easily set off by any perceived slight. And if he ended up directly challenging Jordan, openly defying him, it could very well mean the premature, disastrous end of their carefully negotiated partnership before it even had a chance to truly begin. So the next morning, a Saturday, she showed up at the office in person, unannounced, claiming she was just there to casually check on the joint project team's progress. She stood quietly in the doorway of the bustling joint project office. Inside, Jordan was briefing the assembled team, his demeanor cool, focused, utterly professional. Kevin was off in a far corner, arms crossed defiantly over his chest, silent, stiff, and radiating an aura of sullen resentment. Melody took a hesitant step forward, clearly about to say something, to intervene, when I intercepted her just outside the door. "Come with me, Melody," I said quietly, my voice firm. "If there's something you wish to say, let's please do it privately, in my office." Once we were seated and she'd barely settled into the plush leather chair opposite my desk, I got straight to the point. "You're here to speak up for your son, aren't you, Melody? To plead his case?" She froze for a second, momentarily caught off guard by my directness. It's not about defending him, Sarah. Not exactly," she said carefully, choosing her words with precision. I just worry he won't be able to keep up with the pace, with the demands. And if he drags down the project schedule, if he causes delays." I didn't let her finish. "Melody, if he genuinely can't keep up, then the absolute last thing you should do is interfere on his behalf." Her mouth opened, then closed again without a sound. She had no immediate response. I nodded. That was all I needed to hear. For now. The immediate issue, it seemed, was settled. But deep down, I knew, with a certainty that chilled me slightly, that this wasn't truly over. Kevin was not the type of young man to simply fade quietly into the background. If he felt boxed in, cornered, he would inevitably, explosively, attempt to create his own stage, his own drama. And people like that, people with that volatile combination of arrogance and insecurity, they are always most dangerous when they are desperately trying to prove something. Because that's precisely when they tend to make the very worst, most catastrophic decisions. In the final, critical stretch of the Metro Ring project, trouble hit, just as I had feared, and it was, predictably, Kevin, desperately trying to prove himself, to make his mark. He went completely off script, unilaterally changing a key supplier contract at a pivotal stage of the construction, without seeking or obtaining any prior approval from Jordan or the senior engineering team. The immediate result was a cascade of debilitating problems, significant delivery delays, critical material mismatches that compromised structural integrity, and a near disaster that almost brought the entire multi-million-dollar build to a grinding, irreversible halt. Jordan found out and didn't waste a single precious second. He grabbed his core team, and together, they pulled 3 consecutive all-nighters, working non-stop, fueled by adrenaline and sheer determination to reverse the extensive damage Kevin had wrought. He didn't sleep, didn't complain, just kept pushing forward relentlessly, personally directing every inch of the site remediation himself, until, finally, painstakingly, it was all back on track. When the last ceremonial brick was laid, and the final exhaustive city inspection came back clean, with commendations, I stood at the edge of the now completed construction zone and looked at Jordan. He was drenched in sweat, his work shirt clinging to his back, his eyes sharp with an almost unbearable exhaustion, yet also alight with a fierce, undeniable pride. I couldn't quite describe the feeling that washed over me then. Immense pride, certainly, profound relief, yes, but also something deeper, something more elemental. The project was done. Against all odds, despite the internal sabotage, it had been delivered, on time and under budget. And the final result was, by all accounts, beyond all expectations. The city representatives were thrilled. Right there, on the newly paved site, amidst the cheers of the assembled crew, Jordan signed the next contract. This one even bigger, bolder, more complex than the last. Kevin, on the other hand, was quietly, unceremoniously removed from the team, his association with Miller and company completely, permanently severed. Melody didn't argue, didn't protest. She brought him into my office herself later that week, her demeanor calm, composed, almost serene. "My son," she said, her voice devoid of any discernible emotion, "is clearly not built for this particular path, Sarah." She looked me directly in the eye, her gaze steady, unwavering, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your son, Jordan. He won." I shook my head gently. This wasn't about winning or losing, Melody. He was simply ready. Melody nodded slowly, a thoughtful, almost melancholic expression on her face. "I understand. I will find him another direction, another avenue for his energies. He will not get in your way, or Jordan's, again." When she left my office that day, she carried no discernible bitterness, no lingering resentment, just offered a simple, quiet goodbye and a thank you. I watched her walk out, her posture erect, her dignity intact, and felt something subtly shift inside me. Some battles, I realized, don't need to be fought to exhaustion, to mutual destruction, to know who is left standing, stronger at the end. That was the precise moment I made my own decision. I retired. I stepped away from the daily grind of projects, the endless stress of budgets, the complex human drama of personnel decisions. And, most importantly, I stopped guiding Jordan's hand, stopped offering unsolicited advice, stopped hovering. He sat with me in my office for a long time that afternoon, after I told him. A comfortable, contemplative silence stretching between us. "Finally," he asked, his voice tinged with a mixture of surprise and something akin to uncertainty, "Mom, you're really not going to help me anymore?" I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "Sweetheart," I said, reaching across the desk to briefly touch his hand, "you've grown faster, learned more than I ever expected, ever dared to hope. I could certainly stay on for another few years, sure, but truthfully, Jordan, there's simply no longer any need." "Well, there's simply no longer any need." He looked down at his own hands, then let out a quiet laugh, half relief, half something that sounded remarkably like hesitation, like a young eagle suddenly realizing the nest is empty, and the vast expanse of the sky is entirely his to navigate. That evening, for the very first time, he invited me to the informal celebration party the younger team members were throwing to mark the project's successful completion. I stood near the back of the crowded, noisy room, content to observe, watching him take the makeshift stage. He introduced the key members of the team, generously thanked the clients and city officials, even cracked a few surprisingly good jokes. He was confident, warm, engaging. He knew exactly what he was doing. Someone standing beside me, a junior engineer I vaguely recognized, leaned in and said, with genuine admiration in his voice, "Your son's really impressive, Mrs. Miller." I smiled. "Yes," I replied softly, "he really, truly is." When the event eventually wound down, Jordan walked over to where I was standing and clinked his glass gently against mine. "Mom," he said, his eyes shining, do you feel at peace now?" I nodded, a profound sense of contentment settling over me. "I do, Jordan. You've become someone people can truly count on, a leader." He paused, then asked, his voice a little softer, "And you, Mom, what about you?" I looked at him, my voice equally soft, imbued with a newfound lightness. "I can finally, truly let go." He smiled then, a wide, open, joyful smile. So what now? What are you going to do with all this freedom? I thought for a moment, a pleasant vista of quiet, unscheduled days stretching before me. Buy some flowers, perhaps, I mused. Maybe finally adopt that rescue cat I've always wanted. Read all those books I've been stockpiling. Do the things I love. The rest, Jordan. The rest is entirely yours. He raised his glass a little higher, his expression suddenly, unexpectedly, serious. Thank you, Mom, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. Thank you for getting me here. I didn't respond with words. I just touched my glass to his one last time, a silent acknowledgement, a passing of the torch, and then turned towards the exit. The night air, as I stepped outside, was cool and quiet against my skin, and I knew in that precise, liberating moment that the hardest, most protracted battle of my entire life had had nothing whatsoever to do with Steve or Vanessa, or the cabal of relatives who had tried so hard to block my path. It had been the long, arduous battle with myself, with my own ingrained sense of obligation, with my fears, with my reluctance to finally let go. But now, at long last, I could exhale.